Hello, and welcome to the TR Talk Show. I am your host, Hawk Robinson, and this is episode 7 of the Therapeutic Recreation Talk Show. This is November 12th, 2019. Today we're going to be touching base on the latest update from the BCI Game Jam, Brain-Computer Interface Game Jam, that just took place this past weekend in Calgary, Canada. And then we're going to start talking about the TTM SOC, the Transtheoretical or Stages of Change model, and how that relates to recreation therapy and different modalities. So the BCI Game Jam I've talked about previously, was leading up to on one of my other talk shows, the RPG Talk Show. We had one of the organizers of that show event on our show about a month and a half ago, leading up to this event. And so this weekend, they did a multi-day event. They had people taking the available software and kit and putting together some video games that were controlled through the brain-computer interface rather than more physical, tactile controls. And they did it with a number of different games. Some you might find somewhat familiar and others more unique. They have a YouTube channel if you want to check out their videos from the streaming. They were streaming live on and off, and we will kind of show you a few of it. So it's Neural Matrix Productions. Oh, darn it. Neural Matrix Entertainment. So Neural Matrix Entertainment is their YouTube channel. And let's see if I can sign in and go ahead and I'll do it under RPG Research. That's fine. Come on. All right. I'm going to subscribe to them. And so there you can find their various videos from that weekend. And you'll notice here, if you're watching the visual version of the stream rather than the podcast, which you can always get links to at trtalkshow.com, you'll see they had a number of different games. They start out kind of explaining, in their earliest videos, explaining the different, what BCI is, how brain-computer interface works. Now, those of us who've been involved with this on and off over the decades, I've been involved since the 80s, on and off, will know other things like EEG, electroencephalogram, bioneurofeedback, specifically neurofeedback, different terms, all leading up to BCI, brain-computer interface, which is basically all the same concepts, but it's got a catchier acronym and maybe a little bit better marketing to it. And so they give you a good summary if you go back to their first video of what BCI and a BCI device is, how they work. And what this has to do with recreation therapy is, number one, accessibility and adaptive equipment. You can do amazing things for people with all kinds of physical disabilities to enable them to be able to interact in the world. Then there's the neurofeedback option. Neurofeedback helps with basically learning how to control your brain. So, for example, with ADHD, which we may talk a little bit about later, depending on time here. Otherwise, we'll save that for another episode. There's a lot of executive function challenges, and one of them is sitting still, focusing, concentrating, etc. And neurofeedback is one of the tools that's found to be fairly effective with helping with those kinds of things, concentration, focus, those areas. And the way it works is there's different brain waves. You got beta, delta, gamma, etc. And you pick a certain brainwave that you're going for, and then in those parameters, they're all numbers, but they show up as a graph. You set parameters, and that as long as you're within a certain parameter for the majority, that it's basically a binary, a threshold that, yes, this is working. And then when you're outside of it, it's a no, it's a zero, it's not working. And these neurofeedback games and such, as you get the right focus and in the right frequency ranges, give feedback through a game or other interface to affirm that you're doing the correct thing and that you want to keep doing more of what you're doing. So that's a form of reinforcement. And so that can be very handy to help develop those skills with focus and others. Other people, if they're tired, it helps them work on their energy levels. There's a lot of different ways you can focus on it. For disabilities, not only does it create the possibility in the future and already kind of here, still at a primitive state, to, in a virtual world, do things that before they couldn't have done. So I worked as a rehabilitation therapist and CNA and LPN trainee at Doxy Hatch on the second floor, which they called the death floor, unfortunately. We had comatose, terminal, and long-term completely paralyzed patients, neck down. At best, they might have eye movement. And I had one patient there that he was 19, 20 years old. He's only a year or two younger than I was at the time, back in the 80s, 90s. And, it was really disturbing. So he'd had a skiing accident. This is back in Utah. Lots of skiing there. And the nature of his injuries, he couldn't even use an eye interface. He didn't have control over his eyes. But he was fully aware. He was trapped in a body that would not let him communicate in any way, shape, or form, but was fully aware, receiving stimulus. And he was on, he's on equipment, and he was on the gelatinous bed, and we had to keep moving, all of that with the bed sores and all of that. And he'd been there over, I think, a year or two by the time I was there. And people had, at first, everybody came and visited him all the time, but because he couldn't really respond, even though they know he's fully conscious and aware and needed that stimulus, people just slowly started showing up less and less and less. And by the time I was there, a year or two after he'd been admitted, people only showed up maybe once or twice a month, sometimes once a week. It was really, oh boy. So, and I was just like, man, if only there was some technology or some way that he could talk through a computer or do something. So, because since we know his brain is working and he's aware, it's just that the signals to the motor controls are all shut off. if only there was some way. And that's where this kind of EEG, brain-computer interface stuff, can be incredibly helpful. Now, that's an extreme case. There are prosthetics that use similar technologies to actuate an arm, etc. And they all follow similar principles of those signals in different ways. But it's all related. And fast forward, I did a paper, I don't know, 10, 12, I think it's 12 years ago, on an experiment, maybe it wasn't quite that, maybe 7 years ago, on an experiment with TBI, brain injury, VR, and EEG. And let's see, biofeedback gaming environment. Yeah, I'm not sure where that is right now. But, and this person in the past had been a software developer, I believe, but was paralyzed. Using the eye interface was difficult. And so they experimented with an EEG setup, a brain-computer interface, in a VR setting. So he's in an immersive world, got the goggles on and everything, and can move around through neural focus and slowly over time be able to type. And that created a means of communication in this virtual world, which eventually meant being able to do things like a chat room on the internet. Very slow, but the more you do it, the faster you get, the better you get as the equipment gets better at differentiating spurious signals versus desired targeted goals, gets better and better. And eventually, this person could have some level of communication, social interaction, and virtually walk around in a VR environment. Now, if we start adding down the road physical avatars where you have a rolling computer screen and such with a webcam that you can actually move around in the real world and such, you then take it to another level of enabling and accessibility and adaptiveness. And you could even theoretically turn that into physical games. So talk about layers of complexity here, but I think it'll happen eventually. So now you can play games using your brain, and then you can now move devices remotely using your brain through these control interfaces. Now let's maybe play soccer with your two little physical avatars knocking a ball around, right? I mean, it depends on how far you want to take it down the road, but it's giving control back to this person in the physical world and then creating recreational possibilities. So you have to first just deal with the functioning and the communication, but then, we all know as recreation therapists how critical recreation and leisure is to a healthy, balanced lifestyle for mental health and all of it. And this really opens that up. So I really encourage you to check this out at itch.io/jam/BCI-Game-Jam. And then on their YouTube channel, you can go to the Neuromatrix Entertainment channel. Again, you just go to YouTube and type in Neural, Neural, Neural Matrix Entertainment, and check out the videos there of the game. So I'll show you a quick little clip here. They got like a Super Mario Brothers clone where you've got one person. So you see in the lower corner, in fact, I think that person there with the beard is actually one of the volunteers over at RPG Research. He was visiting. He's down here in Spokane, but he's up in Calgary. I think that's Eric. So he's got a neural interface on his head. And then the person next to him with the is controlling the left and right. And so Eric is controlling the up and down jumping of the little Mario character, while the other one does the left and right. So they're trying to do that. So that's because of limitations of the hardware and the software and the computer and all of that right now. With beefier tech, you can do more. So this is just a first Brain Jam. It's the first ever BCI Game Jam. And these are one of many experiments. And that's not the only game. They had a number of different games. They had 6 different entries, all coming up with different types of games using this same type of interface. And some of this equipment's more affordable, some of it's more expensive. So here's one where you've got a little directional such, and so he's setting up the equipment and getting everything configured here. Okay, so so again, I encourage you to go check those out. I won't. There was one here that was very different than the others. We'll turn the audio on because the squeals are quite different. This game is different. Sumo Bootle. So you get the direction, you wait for the arrow, and then you think it to activate it. So you see that going, and you get it ready and activate. And they're explaining it in the YouTube videos how to play the game. So, And you get better and better at it the more you do it. Like anything else, through practice, you get better and better. So really check this out for recreation, accessibility, adaptive equipment. You should know about this because this is coming, and we as recreational therapists need to be in the loop on this. My hope is I've got an electronic role-playing game software division over at RPG Research. My end goal is I'm hoping someday, and I've been experimenting with EEG equipment for decades, that we will have full EEG role-playing game interactive capabilities in a VR and AR setting for people with these kinds of disabilities, so that they can have as much of their life back as possible through this kind of equipment. I think it'd be really, really beneficial. So take a look at that. And yeah, so it happened. We were talking about it for weeks leading up to it. It has now happened, and you can now watch all those wonderful little video clips. They're not super exciting, but if you get what's going on, it's actually quite exciting. So check that out. All right. So one of the topics let's consider today, I don't think I've covered it on this show yet, I've covered it on others, is the transtheoretical model or the stages of change. So let me get my paper up. So this is from one of my papers. You can find it on academia.edu, researchgate.net, and elsewhere. And it tends to be role-playing game focused because that's what I was doing a lot of papers on. But you can apply this to most recreational intervention modalities that you might want to use because we're looking at different stages. So we're going to talk about the overview of the origins, evolution, debate, and current applications relevant to the TTM, the Transtheoretical Model, also known as the SOC or SOC, stages of change, and the relevance to certain activities. In the paper, it's role-playing games, but we can broaden that. Includes some of the debate about the viability or argued lack thereof for programs based on the TTM in any setting. So remember, I'll bring up these controversial things like I've been talking before about the fundamental flaw with rec therapy. Unfortunately, I'm a huge advocate for it and very disheartened to find that one of the core components of our practice, the activity analysis form, doesn't have any good metrics for reliability, validity, etc. And I've talked to many practitioners now and looked at their different forms, and none of them have been through proper peer review. And when we've gone through a peer review of them, they have not held up well at all. The binary options hold up fairly well at a 0.9 or better inter-rater reliability, for example. But then all of the scaled and blank and open-ended questions end up having basically close to a 0 to 0.2 inter-rater reliability. They're basically useless. Inter-rater reliability. They may be useful for an individual, but your clients will not get consistent care from different practitioners, unfortunately. And so that's a controversial topic, but I think it's important to be brought up. So same thing with the TTM, which is something that's been taught on and off. Depends on where you went for your training and such. So then also suggestions for potential relevance that it may have in the development and use of recreation education and therapeutic recreation interventions, and some examples of potential implementations based on the TTM or /SOC approach. And then using the TTM as a guide from the TR perspective, it might be possible to create various graduated implementations of different interventions for various populations. Excuse me. So that's what we're going to cover here in just a second. Let me clear my throat. So the inherently flexible and diverse nature of the therapeutic recreation field draws upon many other knowledge and professional domains. That's part of what I like about it, is it's so diverse. Includes psychological counseling theories and practices. One theory from that domain, currently used in a number of counseling areas, is the Transtheoretical Model, TTM, also known as Stages of Change, or SOC. Based on the existing research published in diet, exercise, and substance abuse counseling journals, there are a number of indicators that the TTM/SOC may be useful as a guide for leisure and physical education. According to Chico Mascolo and Raiby 2008, and recreation therapy program development and implementation. They also may be relevant in predicting success rates in conjunction with grit, perseverance, grit, etc., for moderate to higher levels of challenge, as illustrated by Reed, Pritchett, and Kutten in 2012. Though the use of TTM/SOC is not without some detractors, see West 2005, many programs, including government agencies, utilize the model in their publications. Health and Human Services, 1999, and some programs in other countries as recently as 2013, about when this paper was written, by Jones, Jancy, Howitt, Dillewall, Burns, McManus, Hills, and Anderson. The roots of the TTM could arguably be traced as far back as the earliest stages of psychiatry and psychology, beginning with Freud's psychoanalytic approach, Jung's analytical psychology, and Rogers' humanistic approach. Quote, a relationship encompassing empathy, genuineness, and respect. Of course, that's Carl Rogers, 1957. Developing the ideas of a need for trust and respect in the client/therapist relationship as an important relationship, though research shows not completely sufficient component in a client's recovery prospect. So it's not as much as some claim it to be based on the conflicting research. So this builds on five theories of helping. Psychoanalytic, behaviorist, cognitive behavioral, growth psychology, and positive psychology, according to Stumbo and Whitman, 2011, page 116. As a beginning, continuing to take shape with common factors, the TTM model was evolving as a distinctly specific theory in the 1980s, progressing towards substantiation and subsequent publications by Prochaska, Di Clemente, and Norcross and others, with ongoing implementations based on the model published as 2013. I probably should do an update on this since it's been 6 years since I wrote this. While TTM does not actually provide any specific techniques of implementation, it can provide a template for processes that can be used in a variety of therapeutic modalities that map well to the stages of change addressed within the theory. So Stumbo and Wardlaw in 2011 provide an example of a specific therapy that has been developed using the TTM to help clients achieve measurable change with the motivational interviewing approach, the MI. However, there are arguments about TTM and SOC. By the way, do feel free to comment either during this live stream. I would look forward to your comments and questions if you need me to further elaborate, or if you have conflicting viewpoints. Wonderful. Love that. And so you can post that here in the YouTube stream, or you can do it after. If you don't catch this while it's live and you're at the recording, you can post comments on the video, and then I'll get notified and be able to respond to that as well. And then usually I try to respond to those on the following show. So we welcome that. And also remember, we are looking actively for recreation therapy, therapeutic recreation, guests, and even co-hosts. It's much more interesting when you have two or more people having a discussion or even a panel than to just listen to me doing these monologues, I would think. I hope you enjoy the content well enough, but I think it's much more interesting when there's multiple viewpoints and experiences. So if you are interested, please email trtalkshow@gmail.com. And we can get you hooked up. You can join remotely. You don't have to be in the Spokane area. We have a way for you to join remotely fairly easily through something called Jitsi. It's open source, and it can get you here a virtual presence. So we are looking for that. So if you have experience with this and thoughts about this, please post them. Really look forward to your comments. So there have been some detractors of the TTM and SOC model, claiming that it's too linear, assumes too much clarity of forethought by the clients, that it's too arbitrary in boundaries between stages, and that the stages are of such divergent construct types that they do not integrate coherently, and so that it ignores motivational underpinnings and is ineffective in making accurate predictions. And this is a big problem for a lot of the stage theories, right? We look at Erickson and all the others, and they all have these kinds of problems where they've made these seemingly arbitrary delineations, and really they're general concepts, and they've had to, for the sake of publishing and explaining, create these boundaries, but they don't tend to really hold up well in the real world. They're great for theoretical discussions and expressing concepts, but they tend to break down when you start trying to do empirical research to validate these theories. And so this is yet another one, and that's why we see more and more of the tendency towards a spectra rather than everything being, quite as categorized and separated as they used to be. A lot more fuzzy boundaries than we used to see. So, though Robert West 2006 argues that the TTM is too linear, and while the TTM's SOC stages are considered to flow more effectively when performed in a more linear fashion, the TTM does allow for the nonlinear nature of individuals' motivation and action levels due to people's variability in drive and behavior, allowing that there will be ups and downs, setbacks, and other unforeseen changes. The TTM allows for cycling through these stages to varying degrees. So it does take some of that into account. In the same above-cited letter to the journal editor, while arguing against the continued use of TTM SOC, Robert West points out just how widely used the model is for just one area of focus. For example, smoking cessation and other substance abuse. Quote, of 540 articles found in PubMed using the search phrase stages of change, 174 also had smoking in the abstract or title, 60 had alcohol, 7 had cocaine, 2 had heroin or opiate, and 1 had gambling. Now, Stumbo and Whitman claim that, quote, TTM is the most popular health behavior change theory in the health literature. Now, that's back in 2011. There have been changes. And in the process of researching this paper, I found that many stage-based interventions were easily found to be published, though many seemed focused on physical exercise and substance use or abuse cessation. Despite the ongoing debate, the TTM SOC model is frequently used for dietary and physical exercise compliance, a whole bunch of citations on that, and has become standard for use in many substance abuse programs. And unfortunately, as we've seen, a lot of rehab programs like that, substance rehab programs, depending upon the study, may only have a 17, 20, 30% efficacy rate the first time they go through, which is abysmal as an efficacy. Luckily, there are other more creative solutions out there now that are starting to have a lot better numbers as we break out of a lot of these things that have been done since the 1950s or even longer. So differentiation between leisure education and leisure counseling. While counseling techniques are important and useful for therapeutic recreation professionals, it's important to note that, according to Stumbo and Whitman 2011, there is a distinct difference between leisure education and leisure counseling. According to them, leisure education has a specific and predetermined content, while leisure counseling has the focus of which problems to address in the counseling. It originates from the individual client. So Lambert, 1992, claimed the greatest factor in predicting a client's compliance and success with therapy is, quote, pre-existing client qualities such as length of time and level of impairment. Then, of course, we have, as many of us TRs ascribe to, the holistic perspective. A relevant quote that is a favorite of mine is from the Introduction to TR textbook by Austin and Crawford. I think it was around 2001 was the book. I think it's a 77 quote. Holistic medicine, ... treats the person rather than the disease, ... Concern lies with the whole person and with permitting individuals to assume self-responsibility for their own health. That's Austin, 1999, Ardell, 77. Whereas illness is the sole concern of traditional medicine, well medicine deals with wellness or health promotion, end quote. So that's a favorite quote I like to reference in a lot of our approach and such. The TTM addresses this approach as a multifaceted model that, quote, harnesses knowledge about specific ways that people change processes, based on different levels of readiness to change, stages of change, while attending to relationship factors best suited for differential readiness to change, right? So we've got our change processes, our stages of change, and our differential readiness for change. That's from Prochaska et al., 1992. Initially defined 5 stages in the TTM SOC, later adding termination as a 6th stage. So the 6 stages of change. The model posits that there are 6 stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and then the 6th one, termination. In the pre-contemplation stage, the client is unaware in part or in whole of any need for change. They're just oblivious. They don't know, right? We hear all the time, like, well, the first step is acknowledging awareness that there's a problem. When the client is in the contemplation stage, the client is aware of an issue or issues and the possible need for change, but has not yet taken any action. Typically, the TRS might, in this stage, encourage the client to explore and choose their own options. While in the preparation stage, the client is aware there is an issue, understands the need to take action, and has made some preliminary plans toward taking action relevant to the desired outcomes. At this stage, the TRS could assume, for those of you who aren't recreation therapists, TRS is Therapeutic Recreation Specialist, could assume the role of a coaching relationship, providing guidance and ideas at regular intervals. Now, once the client's in the action stage, to various degrees, this is the stage when the client actually engages in the activities themselves necessary to cause change towards the desired outcomes. At this stage, the TRS may be directly engaged or may step aside and act more in a consulting role. Right, we've talked about that with the linear progression and such. On previous episodes, we talked about that at length. From TR, lots of control, client, very little control, to increasing client control, and the TR, less control towards self-actualization, self-sufficiency, etc. So this is the where it's a more clearly obvious stage for the client. But the TTM viewpoint states that this stage would not be possible without the previous stages first taking place to some degree. In other words, they're not really aware of the pre-contemplation and contemplation phase. They only become aware when they're finally at the action phase. The preparation maybe, but especially at the action phase. At some point, the client achieves the maintenance stage, and the TTM view is that just as clients are variable in mood and drive to get to the first 4 stages, maintaining the activity over time will likely have variability as well. The TRS provides contact information to the client, encourages the client to utilize the TRS in the future, and ongoing consultation role is needed. But, we have some sort of exit strategy, a transition plan for them to do it on their own. Hopefully we found what is intrinsically motivating enough to keep them doing it, right? This is one of the key things we as recreation therapists are supposed to differentiate ourselves from PT and OT and the others, is that because we've found what they enjoy, they're intrinsically motivated, they're going to keep doing what normally would be tedious and difficult if they had been, just given a prescription by a physical therapist or other to just do these activities over and over because it's good for you and it's good for you. But they're not very rewarding other than the long-term benefit that many clients have trouble with. But if we find it that what's intrinsically motivating an activity, they'll just keep doing it because they enjoy it anyway, and then they will keep their maintenance level of progress at a higher level. So there's a number of different examples. This is going to use an example from role-playing games because, that's kind of my specialty area, also music as well. If I think of some others to interject in here, I will, but that's where this paper is coming from. But again, insert whatever recreational activity that you think you can handle in stages. This is just a template that you could use and insert. So this example is application of TTN using graduated role-playing game formats for at-risk youth and young adults. The following series of recreational activities could be described using the TTM theories. These programs are designed to address populations including at-risk youth and or juveniles in the legal system that may have issues with aggressive behavior, maladaptive problem-solving approaches, or other antisocial issues. The intervention approach is a series of graduated role-playing game, RPG, format variants with specific adventure scenarios focused on alternative approaches to problem solving rather than resorting to violence, crime, or other antisocial behavior. So, pre-contemplation stage. In the pre-contemplation stage, the client does not initially see a reason need or have any desire to address currently maladaptive problem-solving skills. But it may be on the radar due to recent encounters with law enforcement or other authorities, indicating there might be something that needs addressing. However, the client does not yet have any intention to make any effort to change their current behavior. At this stage, it's recommended that the TRS act as a guide, emulating a trusted individual who helps the client consider options, introducing the client to the concept that there might be other approaches to problem solving that could be more productive towards the client's intended long-term life goals. For example, moving out of parents' or guardians' home, reducing real-world physical combat encounter risks, having their own residence, getting a job, staying out of jail, having opportunities for travel, finishing school, purchasing and maintaining an automobile, etc. And that various role-playing game formats may be able to help the client learn more constructive approaches because of the scenarios that you're able to set up and practice and learn. Contemplation stage. As the client increases their awareness in the contemplation stage, the client may have been nudged into this stage by receiving a warning from school that they face potential suspension, or received an edict for court-ordered fines, restitution, or community service to address behavioral issues within the next 6 months. Though the client may be highly distressed and still expressing considerable anger, the TRS could provide some positive motivators for them to consider using insert activity, in this case we'll use role-playing games, to improve the current stress situation. Now again, this will be based on doing an assessment of your client, figuring out what their activities are, going through the recreation leisure education process, and maybe find out, maybe role-playing game might be a fit, or maybe music would be a fit, or maybe something, there's all sorts of different options, baseball, whatever. And the TRS could provide some positive motivators. Consider using role-playing games to improve the current stress situation. Perhaps from prior experience or newly introduced by the TRS, because you could be working with baby boomers here too. Now, right now we're focusing on adolescents, but remember a lot of people grew up with this activity in the 70s and 80s. As baby boomers, now they're coming into retirement. They have a lot more free time. They're having trouble making new friends. This can be a great activity to solve a lot of issues there. So it also applies to adult and incarcerated populations and at-risk populations there as well. But we're focusing on youth, but again, you can extrapolate it from the same information. Considering either paper or electronic versions of solo adventure books or modules in a role-playing game format, or if the client already enjoys video games or adventure movies, the TRS could introduce the client to solo problem-solving centric, focused electronic role-playing games, then graduate towards some socially cooperative computer RPGs instead of the solo ones. So multiplayer, MRPGs, MMORPGs, etc. You want to be careful about those. We tend to recommend Neverwinter Nights because it gives the therapist a lot of control over the environment, 100% control. It's been reissued, it's very affordable, and it's cross-platform on Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, and soon on consoles. And it's been around since 2002, so it doesn't require a lot of hardware, and yet it's still a very engaging activity. And the therapist can maintain control of the entire environment, and you can control who comes into that group, etc. If there's less concern, you can always put them on a public multiplayer game like World of Warcraft or something, but generally we don't recommend that off the bat. There are issues there. So Neverwinter Nights we find to be a really good control for it. And we do Neverwinter Nights training every other week over at RPG Research, and then we also do it in our private practice LLC for clients. Works quite well. The TRS could also discuss the ideas of tabletop and live action role-playing, such as LARPs, for consideration down the road to further refine their basic problem-solving skills that they're introduced to in the electronic role-playing game, the ERPG, and the computer-based art subtype, as well as the positive physical outlet and exercise. Preparation stage. Once the client acknowledges that something needs to be done, now in the preparation phase, they agree to some of the suggestions by the TRS. The therapist can help the client create a proposed schedule, devise acquisition of resources, and establish some specific goals. First with the computer-based RPG, then migrating toward tabletop RPG and live-action role-playing games. And I just thought of something I need to remember about a client of mine. I need to send them a link for some movies. All right. Action stages. Now that the client has buy-in and is willing to take action, the TRS facilitates the client, engaging the client initially with controlled solo computer-based RPGs with specific problem-solving scenarios. Now, again, if you can do the computer-based version, Neverwinter Nights is by far the best tool we've found for the job. There's no other video role-playing game that gives you so much control. It can be solo, it can be multiplayer. You can create all custom scenarios from scratch, or you can pick from thousands of existing ones. It's amazing. I can't. If you're going to use an electronic role-playing game, really check that out. If you're looking at like a print version, like a Choose Your Own Adventure book and such, which isn't really a role-playing game, there are others like Lone Wolf, which actually are role-playing games where you get to actually create a character and roll dice, and you have cumulative consequences that are measurable. These role-playing games actually create measurable numbers to track progression between different clients. So there's assessment built into the games that can give you very helpful information instead of a more subjective interpretation of progress. You can actually see numbers as part of the activity. And that can help you to see how your different clients do from week to week and over time and such. So the client's guided through processing what they learned from different outcomes of various adventure scenarios as each is completed. And this is all part of that exploration as an important form of learning that Dr. Tedolo talks about out of Penn State in his book, Facilitation Techniques in Therapeutic Recreation, and then also at some of the conferences we've been at. And so they learn from the different outcomes of various adventure scenarios as each is completed, building on these introductory skills with increasingly challenging adventures, so trying to keep them in flow state as best as possible, right? Keep that balance between enough challenge without it being too much and not too little so that they get bored. And maybe later introduce them to online variants, interacting with other player characters, experiencing the consequences of solo versus cooperative play with others. The client can learn that they can't compete or they can't complete the quest or beat the boss without help and ideas from others. There is no way to win unless you work with others, is some of the advantages of these cooperative multiplayer ones. And the increasing need for others to help the client achieve more challenging and more rewarding goals. So sometimes it can be pretty simple, but over time, you need to kind of up the ante to something that keeps them engaged. At the appropriate time, the TRS can introduce the client to a tabletop role-playing game. Maybe at first it's just a one-on-one with the therapist as a GM or somebody else's GM guided by the therapist. And then later with a larger group of 3 to 6 players. We generally recommend 4 or 5 players, the sweet spot. So you have the game master and 4 players. That is just the right amount for people not having to wait too long to take a turn, etc. Using what was previously learned as concepts in general concepts from the video game in a role-playing game, creation of a character, rules for resolution of action, approaches to problem solving, etc. The client now engages in a fully local rather than online, in-person, social situation, working to cooperatively achieve mutual and personal goals. Beginning at first with simpler adventure challenges, but gradually increasing the challenge, and then subsequent rewards realized within the game setting. Finally, when the client has shown significant improvement in individual and socially cooperative problem-solving skills, the TRS introduces the client, for example, to live-action role-playing, LARP, either combat action-centric or drama non-combat style, depending on the propensities, physical coordination abilities, behavioral control, and the individual interest of the client, as well as facilities and resource availability, engaging in even more socially complex cooperative and competitive scenarios. Then we get to the maintenance stage. In the maintenance stage, the client continues to iterate between computer-based tabletop live-action role-playing gaming as appropriate to client needs and success levels. The TRS will help the client realize and illustrate all that they have learned, guiding the client to see the social liberation that their social norms are changing in the direction, says, quote, social norms are changing the direction of supporting the healthy behavior change, Stummo and Whitman, 2011. By having the client explain to the TRS and potentially other participants what they have learned through the process, what worked well, what did not, what was more motivating and what was discouraging. So these are all those pre and post processing conversations we always like to have. Using the client's own feedback, the TRS can help the client develop an ongoing maintenance schedule for sustaining the current levels of functioning and then set goals for ongoing potential continued growth, rather than just continue their growth through regular gaming, group sessions, established schedules, etc., and some specific goals. Then we get to the termination phase and wrap up this topic. So at some point, the client may reach the termination stage, when the legal, educational, social, physical, financial, health, or other issues have been resolved in one form or another. The client may no longer have the external pressures to engage in the activity. The client may choose to continue on their own for the enjoyment and intrinsic motivation, or desire to continue towards ongoing growth, or the client may choose to discontinue the activities, either abruptly or gradually over time, without the external forces if the motivation was mostly extrinsic. So that's why that intrinsic motivation is so critical. If you force it on them, they're less likely to continue it. So make sure you're matching the right activities to the right person, and they're not just nodding to get through it and move on, that you've actually found what clicks for them. So that gives you kind of a brief discussion of theoretical model, and then some example applications that you can then insert. So again, it makes a very good template. And even though there are some issues with these kind of rigid stages, if you loosen up and don't get too hung up on the stages being rigid, if you allow for iteration and variability and such, which is the human nature, this can be a great guideline and scaffold when you're putting your program plan together. And again, you can insert different activities and you can insert different populations with different goals. This is just to give you some tangible examples, taking an abstract theory and putting it into application. And then we have done this in practice, so we have a lot of evidence in practice of exactly this kind of program with that particular modality, with that particular population being highly effective. For example, transition plans from inpatient to outpatient substance dependency and gang violence members, giving them, you have to replace, if you're going to take away their substance or you take away their social peer group, say, you can't do drugs anymore and you can't hang out with the group you hung out with before. Well, you have to give them a new activity that they're going to enjoy and a new peer group to hang out with, or it's going to be next to impossible for them to resist going back because of the lonely it is, bored, what have you. Forget the chemical withdrawal and all that other stuff. Just that alone, just that human need, even with introverts, there's still going to be some level of that human need for connection and something to do, and you want to give them something else. And too many programs just say, no, take away, and don't fill that vacancy with something better. And so this is an example where we get them day passes, escort them, have them meet a group at a game store, get to know the folks, participate, and build that up before they have their exit, and have a robust transition plan. By the time they get out, they've got a new peer group, they have a new activity. It gives them lots of engagement. They can do both on their own and solo time and with groups, and you've got a whole flexibility of things to help them stay out of trouble. And those that we've put through these programs, so far we're having a phenomenal success rate. For example, one location alone, after about 5 years, so far for this population that typically about 80% reoffend within 18 months, we've had zero recidivism. Now, it's not a huge number. We're talking about a half dozen different individual clients over the years, but that's promising. And then with others, in other areas, we see similar results and such. So these can all be very helpful. So insert whatever you think is the best activity for your person, do the proper assessment. And hopefully you found this a useful example. And there are, again, different ways to look at these, a lot of ways to skin these cats. But I hope you found this. Now, this was a more lecture-oriented episode of the TR Talk Show. Again, we're looking for guests and co-hosts to make it more of a dialogue. But different days, I'm going to try to cover different topics. Let me know. If you look at the other 6 episodes, and this is episode 7, how did you like this episode compared to the other episodes? Do you want to see more of this lecture type? Do you want to see more of the other more dynamic ones that covered a broader range in shorter pieces? Do you like this deep dive, or would you rather just stay a lot of just introduce you to a few concepts and then just moved on to the next one and didn't spend maybe more than 5 to 15 minutes on a particular topic instead of most of the show? Let me know what you'd like to see, and we'll go ahead and mix that up and around as needed. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Remember, you can contact us at trtalkshow@gmail.com. And we'll be back, I believe, next Tuesday. We're good to go, I believe. Yeah, I think next Tuesday is good. And, of course, if you missed the live episodes, we have the links on the website at trtalkshow.com. And do please check that out. So wherever you may be well, and happy recreation therapeutic recreation. Bye.